Chapter 1. I was a government employee for the National Archives for the last 30 years. I cataloged artifacts and documents left behind by our forefathers and documented the history of the United States of America. I finally became disillusioned by the lies that I saw from the stories between the men who started this country all the way through to the present century. I had to get out, since I started to learn what price we paid for our indiscretions. I quit and went out into the private sector. That's how I ended up buying a cemetery. Washington, D.C. was getting on my nerves, so I moved back to my childhood town of Fraser, Michigan, and found a small, cheap apartment. Ever since I started working in D.C., I had saved a portion of my pay in a savings account, and after 30 years, I had enough to get by for quite a while. I was in my 60s and didn't want to sit around, so I needed a job to keep busy. I finally found a part-time job in a local library. I was known in the city since I grew up here, and the people at the library all knew me. My home has 2 cemeteries within the city, one owned by the local Catholic Church and one privately owned. I had passed the privately owned one a number of times after I got back home. One afternoon, as I drove along the main road out of town to go shopping for groceries, I saw a sign out front of the privately owned cemetery that said it was for sale. I was amazed that a cemetery could be sold, but there was the sign. I pulled over and wrote down the phone number that was crudely written on the bottom of the sign, probably purchased at the local dollar store. I pulled out my cell phone and dialed the number. I don't know why the thought of buying a cemetery intrigued me. As a teen, I used to play in that cemetery at night with a couple buddies I had. We'd crouch behind the tombstones and play hide and seek, usually scaring the crap out of the person trying to find us. My first kiss was in this cemetery. Lana Crawford and I braved the place to park, and nature took its course, so I had a history with that hallowed piece of land. The phone rang and was answered. "Yeah, what you want?" a man said in a gruff voice. I immediately recognized it as Old Man Crenshaw, the man who owned the property. He had chased us out of the place on a number of occasions. "Mr. Crenshaw, my name's Jake Weiler, and I'm calling about your for sale sign." "You want to buy the sign?" he growled. "No, sir, the property." "Say, are you Dick Weiler's kid?" "Well, I'm hardly a kid now, and yes, my father was Dick Weiler." "What's the old bastard doing now?" "Sorry, the old bastard passed away 8 years ago. As a matter of fact, he's buried in your cemetery." "Damn, that's too bad that he kicked the bucket. I used to drink with him at the VFW until we couldn't stand." "Yes, and then he'd come home and beat on me. I don't regret his passing." "Oh, I didn't know that. Sorry. Well, you interested in the property?" "I may be, if the price is right. I don't suppose it makes any money." "Hell no. The stiffs pay once, and then they take up space. I was going to dig 'em all up and move 'em, but the city told me I couldn't. The upkeep is getting too much for me. Cutting grass and weeding is not what I want to do for the rest of my life. Trying to find people to do the job is not easy either. They want to be paid." "I'm at the cemetery now. Can we meet?" "You should know I live next to the cemetery, since I had to chase you and those other brats out. I'll be there shortly." He hung up, and I backed the car to the dirt drive that wound around the place. I stopped at the place where Lana and I had parked, and was startled when he knocked on my window. "Geez, you got old," he said as I got out. "Well, you don't look so hot yourself," I replied. He did look like he was a candidate for burial in the place. He laughed and said, "We all grow too old too soon. Now, do you want the cemetery?" I looked around and asked, "Have you had many people asking about it?" "Hell no. Who wants to own a cemetery? You're the first to ask." I moved to an area that I was told where they buried my old man. I found the simple flat headstone that the Veterans Administration bought for him. He was once a career soldier in the Marines, but he took a bullet to his leg and couldn't get around without a limp. Crenshaw stood next to me and said, "May he rest in peace." I thought he could rest in hell for all he put me through. When I was 18, I joined the Marines, which made him proud. I only joined to get away from him. I grew up in the Marines, seeing lots of combat during the couple wars that the U.S. stuck their noses in, and then they put me in a special ops section. I lasted there about 10 years before I got out and went to work in D.C. I turned away from the headstone and went back to my car. "How much do you want for it?" "I want to get out of this damn town, so I'm making you a real good deal. $250K and it's yours." "Will you stay long enough to get me started? I've never owned a cemetery before." "Oh, well, I'll stay for a short time. Then I'm gone. You want the place?" "Does your house come with it?" "It's on cemetery property, so it does. It needs lots of work to clean it up. I'm not a damn housekeeper." I mulled it over. I knew I had the money in my savings, but I would have to scrimp after dropping $250K. I looked around. The place had a nice feel to it, despite the headstone standing tall. I guess my love of things past, things forgotten, made me say, "I'll take it."